Magister Jochen Buchmaier je generalni direktor Humus plus model ekoregion Keindorf. Ima skoraj 20 let izkušenj na področju regenerativnega kmetijstva. Je pionir pri izdajanju humusnih certifikatov, ki nagrajujejo kmete za njihove uspehe pri izboljšanju stanja tal, rodovitnosti, zmogljivosti shranjevanja vode in odpornosti. Vse, o čemer smo danes že veliko govorili. V svoji predstavitvi bo orisal pomen uporabe kmetijstva kot sredstva za ublažitev podnebnih sprememb. Poglejmo, če je gospod že z nami. Hello, welcome in Slovenia, even though only online. Thank you for joining us. Can you hear us?
Dober večer. Yes, I can hear you.
Dober večer tudi vam. So we are all really looking forward to your presentation and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pity I can't join you in person. We are having a course here for 2 days planting trees with agroforestry systems, so I can't be there in person. But I'm very happy to join you online and share a little bit of our experience of regenerative agriculture in Austria for the past 17 years. I will share my presentation now. I hope it is visible. Yeah, I hope you had an interesting day and you're still receptive for some input. I will tell you a little bit of our experience in Austria on climate change mitigation and adaptation in regenerative agriculture, with which we've been working for the past 17 years within the Humus project and the ecoregion Keindorf. First, before we step into the methods of regenerative agriculture, I want to share a little bit the background and what we have to be aware of when looking at what is necessary for climate change mitigation and adaptation. First of all, we have a CO2 level in our atmosphere which has not been that high for the past 15 million years. So mankind has not really experienced the level where we are already at now, not even talking about where we might go to. If we look at the rise, this is a curve, you've probably seen this many times, of how the CO2 level is concentrating currently in our atmosphere. Just for the past 60 years, we can see an accumulation of a third and summing to the level of the 60s. So currently we're at around 420 ppm. And we can also see that there is a change, an annual change of variation in the top of around 3 ppm, which accounts for the Nordic Hemisphere vegetation period. If we look at the climate, and I have figures here for Austria, but fair enough, it will be very similar in Slovenia. We can see that the temperature has risen accordingly in the last, especially 40 years, also parallel to the rise of CO2. So there is a very close relation between the rise of temperature and the rise of CO2. If we talk about our climate goals and the Paris Agreement right now, we have another COP29 Paris Agreement, which we agreed upon, wants to delimit the rise of temperature to 1.5 degrees in average. Which is not realistic, and last year has been the first year where we actually have been over this level already, which for a country like Austria and also Slovenia in most cases would mean a rise of temperature between 4 to 5 degrees, which is already quite a bit in average. Not even talking about that we have to see whether it's realistic that we can delimit it to these temperatures and to these goals. What does this mean for heat days? In terms of heat days, we can see that in comparison to the beginning of the century, where we had about 2 heat days a year, to the end of the century, we will experience up to 50 heat days, so 25 times. Also looking at how many heat episodes we already have now, even this will multiplicate by 10 till the end of the century, according to predictions for Austria. So heat is a very major issue, but it's not only heat, but obviously also related to the heat. The atmosphere can take up way more water in higher temperatures, which means that eventually this water will come down also, which will lead to flooding. These are pictures of this year. I think also Slovenia has had some flooding this year and in the past years. These are some images of Lower Austria, where it has rained 350 liters in a couple of days in the region, which is more than a third of the average precipitation of this region within a couple of days, leading to tremendous damage and death. Looking at how the precipitation has varied over the country, we can see that very often it will lead to rainy or flooding events, which can be very, very local. So we see that within very few kilometers, there might be a big difference of precipitation, and there might be regions where there is lots of flooding and others which might have drier years or even drought. Very sadly, obviously, this has not been the only events. If we look at television these days, in Spain, there has been a tremendous flooding. Actually, it's been the biggest natural catastrophe in Spain ever, leading to hundreds of dead people in the region of Valencia. And also these days, there have been other tremendous floodings in the south of Spain. So we see these events will become more frequent and will influence our life tremendously. Going to agriculture, it's in agriculture, obviously, it's not only drought and flooding which are a problem, but also erosion related to these rain events. So in Austria, we have a soil loss, a loss of the healthy and more fertile soil of between 6 and 10 tons per hectare in the year, which is quite a lot, counting and knowing how difficult it is to build up again topsoil and healthy soil. And obviously all these influences and challenges lead to tremendous economic damage and the necessity of even more resources and a bigger effort needed to overcome these challenges. So to continue with an agriculture as we know it, it will require more resources, more effort, and thus it will also become more difficult to be economically sustainable within agriculture. So basically what we need is we need to acknowledge that we need mitigation and adaptation now. So it's very important to start acting now, acting towards mitigation, which basically in agriculture means find ways of how we can store carbon in the soil or in plants, in trees, etc. But also adaptation to see how can we on a landscape scale adaptate to the climate change, lead to lower temperatures, create microclimates, avoid flooding events, and create more resilience, not only for our agriculture, but also for our society, as we have seen in the flooding events. First of all, talking about mitigation. So how is it that agriculture can contribute to climate change mitigation? How can we store and capture CO2? Basically, it's the photosynthesis which gives us the tool by using plants and plant growth to store carbon in the plants and depending on our management later on also in our soil or in products or in living plants. Yeah? So basically it's photosynthesis which helps us to capture the carbon, and depending on our system, we can store it in healthy soil, making it building up humus, building up topsoil, or integrating more elements in our agricultural systems like agroforestry systems to store the carbon in the trees, in the trunk, or later also in the products of such. If we look at where CO2 is stored in the world, we see that soil is one of the major places where carbon and CO2 is being stored. So we see that it's almost 4 to 5 times of what there is stored in the atmosphere, and also many times what is stored in all the vegetation. So all the forests in the world accumulated store less carbon than the soils do. So this is also how we can see what importance soils have in managing our climate. When we talk about storing carbon in the soil, we basically talk about humus buildup, because humus consists for 58% of carbon, and leading to various advantages also in the management. So it leads to a better accumulation or better storage of water, erosion control, higher fertility, better soil structure, better soil health, better filtering function, and not in the end also the carbon storage, which is interesting for society. What can we do in an agricultural practice to build up humus and to improve our soils? Basically, there's 3 principles which are very interesting to follow. One is maximize diversity. Second one is maximize the photosynthesis effort of the system. And thirdly, minimize the soil distortion, so minimize soil loss through erosion, but also through tillage and so on. I want to elaborate a little bit on this and show different systems, different agricultural approaches which have been proved for us in the past 17 years as successful. So one is diversity. If we use cover crops, intermediate crops, mixed crops, and through this integrate more diversity in our system, go away from very, let's say, monocultural like systems of a very high percentage of corn or other crops, going to diversity, we do not only help the soil organisms, but also the fertility of the soil to build up through the better soil microbiome. Reduced tillage, no-till, strip-till leads to an reduced loss of topsoil. Every time we open up our soil, different nutrients are being mineralized, and through the mineralization, there is an effect which is very, very much looked for in agriculture, which means that the minerals and the nutrients are available, but it also leads to a tremendous loss through evaporation, or in this case, that carbon also reacts and goes into the atmosphere, or loss also through the water into the groundwater. So whenever we can, we reduce the tillage. It can be a reduction of the frequency of the tillage, of the depth, or of the way how we enter the soil. So if we try to avoid the plow, reduce it and go to systems which are less invasive, it can also be beneficial for the humus buildup. Another way to look at how we can improve soil is obviously in adding compost, which basically is nothing else than already reduced and stabilized organic matter, which basically comes from usually agricultural produce, and has a lot of diversity in it, and is very already ready-made for the soil microbiome to build it up and to integrate it. So wherever there is compost available, it can be very beneficial to integrate it into the agricultural systems. Even if we don't have any compost available, but if we have organic matter through our dairy, through whatever vegetation we have leftovers, or nearby, or just simply whatever is left over from the crops, if we compost it, we have a very highly efficient way of bringing this organic matter back to the soil in a stabilized way. So it can be more efficient to compost the leftovers of our crops and bring it back to the farm, to the land, than to just leave it there straight away. Another very effective way of storing the carbon available is charcoal. It can also help us to reduce the loss of nutrients in different systems. So it's very interesting to integrate charcoal in animal systems already in the stable, or when feeding them for welfare of the animals, or to integrate it in composting or in manure or in other systems. So charcoal can be very efficient, not only to bring back more nutrients to the system and store them effectively, but also to reduce the nutrient loss in our system, respectively. Other systems which are very interesting and where we have very good experience, and actually currently we've just been installing new systems today, is agroforestry systems, where we integrate trees again into our agricultural land. So we integrate them into arable land or into grassland in a way that the land can still be managed perfectly by the machines, but that we have respective ecosystemic advantages through the reduction of wind, through the reduction of erosion, the lowering of the temperature, eventually shadowing of our crops, etc., etc. So depending on the design of the system, there can be numerous advantages which can lead even to higher productivity of our overall system. How can these different systems look like? So we have a high variety of how we can design them, integrating crops and timber, integrating fruit systems or biomass systems. I will show you some impressions of how they can look like in different scenes, in different contexts. Here, for example, fruits with lavendel. Here, fruit systems combined with vegetables. We can see here more extensive systems for biomass, where the biomass can be used also for reducing our fossil resources by using the wood chips for heating or for energy production. But also if we have a system without animals, for example, we can use the biomass for composting and bring back these nutrients and the material to our arable land, and thus make humus buildup and improve the quality of our fields without animals. There's other systems going for timber, and obviously we can also combine these systems in any way imaginable, as we will see later. Also very interesting is the effect of shadowing for animal welfare and livestock. In this case here, accompanying the road with trees which have been used also as posts for the fencing. There is really numerous advantages. In this case, it can even be used for feeding the animals, so they can feed on the leaves. There is a high variety and diversity of systems, and it can lead to very good benefits for especially climate change adaptation, but through the storage of carbon in the wood, also to climate change mitigation. As I've said before, there are systems where we combine all these different advantages. So within a syntropic agroforestry, we can combine the production of fruits, of timber, and of biomass with different kind of crops, starting from vegetables to fruit trees to timber wood. Here are some impressions of these systems in the continental climate, in southern climates, especially in South America. It has been very advantageous already, and they've been testing it out for many decades with high success. Another aspect which I want to look at closely is the aspect of water management. So agroforestry systems can be combined also with systems relating to keyline system, where basically we look at the level of the, or let's say the contour line of the fields, and we see how can we avoid water runoff and bring the water to where we want it in the field, which can lead to systems as these, which we have installed over the last year in different areas here in Austria. I will show you some impressions of it. These are some pictures of when we started building one of the systems, where basically we were digging a trench of around 30 centimeters avoiding the water runoff, which comes from the upper part of from the left side of the image, from the neighbor side, going into this or running over this field, and then leading to lots of erosion and sometimes even flooding in the lower parts of the village. So this farmer had a high necessity of avoiding this erosion and avoiding the flooding, and thus he integrated these trenches, which we will see in a minute what effect it had. So this is how these infiltration swales can look like. This is when we started building them. So it's very easy to work with machinery on the lower part and on the higher part, and reducing the place which cannot be worked with machinery to a minimum, which basically is where we plant trees and make sure that these trees benefit also from the water. Here you can see the system, the same system a little later, after rainfall of 30 liters in a couple of minutes. You see that the trees on the right side in the picture, they benefit from the water. The water stays there maybe between some hours and some days, depending on the soil type, and make sure that the water is not being lost, but available on the field for droughts and drier periods. This is an imagery of another farm where actually there, further down in the picture, you would see a spot where it's very moisture usually, and the farmer had problems of working it, and where you see the people, it's a very dry spot. So what we did with this trench is this trench does not only collect the water from the rainfall, where you can see that it works very effectively, but it also brings the water from the moisture zone to a very dry zone, and thus creates more, in both cases, a field which is more homogeneous and easier to work with. Later on, another possibility is also to store this water using these trenches to create water retention zones, to have the water available for watering in a later moment, or at least as a retention space for avoiding flooding further down in the valley. So now I want to talk a little bit about how our project works. So currently we have around 400 farmers in our project in Austria and in Slovenia, with more than 5,500 hectares. So I think some of the colleagues have already seen them now before. There was Matic, for example, who has been part of the project from the beginning, of Humus Plus Slovenia. So since 2022, we have a partnership running with Slovenia, and there is Mojca in the center, who is the person who brings together all the people, the farmer and the laboratory and so on, and administrates the project in Slovenia, which I can recommend you very warmly to think about joining the project and working with this Humus Pillar project of Slovenia, where I will show you now some of the advantages. One incentive, of course, is the creation of certificates. So what we do is we look at the ground soil, we see how much carbon is there stored, and for additional carbon storage, we are able to honor the farmers who are successful. Currently, we have a certificate price of 126 euros per ton, which at the moment is continuously rising, not only because there is a high demand from the industry, but also because the European Commission is just issuing also the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which basically means that companies have to demonstrate what kind of effort they make to make a more sustainable production, and how they employ themselves in creating more sustainability in their environment. So this is one effect of the European Commission, which has a positive effect on the demand. The second one is that there is a carbon removals and carbon farming framework of the European Commission, being issued at the moment. So currently, for the last 1 or 2 years, they have been working on a European framework for programs such as ours within the voluntary carbon farming market to create a European-wide certification model where companies such as ours can be part of. All these led us to basically work on a more holistic certification scheme where we do not only look at the soil and the topsoil, but we look at different possibilities of storing carbon within the agricultural systems, such as trees in agroforestry system, charcoal, and so on, but also in looking how and where do we have the potential of reduction, such as in fertilization and others, to improve the overall footprint of our agriculture and thus contribute to a successful climate change mitigation, to reaching our national goals, which we have, all of us within the European Soil Mission and so on, and as well as leading to a better climate change adaptation and more resilience in our agricultural systems. So I hope that my input was interesting for you. I hope you could learn something new. And last but not least, it's an invitation to you to just start now. Let's generate our soils and our climate together. It's very important to start now, to not wait for much longer, because as we've seen, the time is running and we need productive systems which can contribute to resilience of our society in food production, but also a resilience in respect to our climate. So if there's some questions and remarks, I'm very happy to share them with you and answer one or the other.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure you've heard the appreciation of the audience. And yes, we do have some questions for you. We see the questions. The first one is, were there any regulatory obstacles you faced when developing these systems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were quite some obstacles. First of all, that many did not believe that it would work, which was sometimes a stone in the path of this project. But basically, especially in the application of compost, there have been some regulatory restrictions leading to doubts whether it would be sensible and useful to use use compost in higher amounts. And there have been even some court trials looking at the issue, leading to the result that we saw, that it is very reasonable and also legal to use it.
Okay, thank you.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
There's another question. How do you ensure long-term sequestration so farmers do not emit again after receiving the reward?
Yeah. Long-term sequestration is always an issue. So whenever we talk about nature-based solutions, we have to acknowledge that we can only ensure whatever is in the hand of mankind, and this we can ensure if we have programs which have a long-lasting perspective. In our case, our perspective is of at least 10 years. So a farmer who joins our program, we accompany them for at least 10 years. Most of the farmers which started at the beginning, we've been accompanying them now for 15 years. So, and we see that they continue working and improving their soils. For me, the biggest issue is a social one. So how can we, on the one hand, create a program which is attractive, in our case, to farmers, to make sure that they want to start with us? Yeah. If we have a perspective of 30, 40, 50 years, I'm very sure that most farmers will not enter an obligation of such a long period, which they will probably not see the end of it themselves, but their kids or even their or even beyond this. Yeah. So we have to see a time frame which is not too long to be attractive for farmers, and not too short to be relevant, and to make sure that the habit change really settles. And this is where I see the biggest or the most important element is basically the habit change of the people. So a farmer who has been working, building up humus for 10 years, as they do in our program, and they see the advantages, they see that their soils store more water, they see that they are more fertile, they see that they're more resilient, it is very, very unlikely that they will go back to methods which they have been doing 10 years ago, which have lots of disadvantages and to reduce the fertility of the soil. So this is not very realistic, and it has not happened as such in our program yet. But we can see that obviously, if there is a change of the administrator of a soil, a generation change, or someone loses their soils, obviously it can happen that the soil or the management goes back to different methods, and also leads to the reduction again. But maybe just as a last sentence, for me it's very important not to be afraid of what happens if we lose it again. It's very important to think of what can we do to store carbon in the soil and create fertility, and then make the change which we need, and not be afraid of what will happen if we undo the change again.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers, and once again for your presentation and really interesting examples from practice. And we wish you all the best. But of course, consciousness and conscious people, they give us long-term future. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. And I wish you a very interesting conference today and tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.